From the Zimmerman Symphony Center in Canton, Ohio, this is Orchestrating Change. I'm Matthew Jenkins Yarashevitz, Associate Conductor of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
And I'm Rachel Hagemeyer, Manager of Education and Community Engagement.
We are so glad you could join us.
This podcast navigates issues that exist in the field of classical music and the world at large. We invite you to listen with open ears as our guests share their experiences and as we discuss these often avoided topics.
To open this season, we are thrilled to be joined by Anwar Nasir, Executive Director of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra. Prior to his arrival in the Big Easy in the summer of 2021, he served as Chief Revenue and Advancement Officer at the Omaha Symphony, in addition to previous positions with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Hollywood Bowl, and Atlanta Ballet. He is a Philadelphia native and a graduate of Syracuse University who had a career as a professional dancer before pursuing arts management. He is also passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts and serves on DEI committees with the League of American Orchestras and Tessitura Network and co-founded the Black Arts Leadership Alliance. Anwar Nasir, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to Orchestrating Change.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, this is so wonderful. I've had the pleasure of meeting you at conferences and stuff since COVID has wound down a little bit and we can kind of see each other in person sometimes. Mm-hmm. But can you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself, about, little Anwar growing up in Philadelphia? What was your life like?
Absolutely. So thank you. It's interesting to think about, like, growing up. I'm from South Philadelphia originally, not West Philadelphia like Will Smith, but I like to always play off of that a little bit. But I had the pleasure of going to a small boarding school for single parent, low income children. And I started in third grade. So I stayed there from third all the way through 12th. So it always feels like, even though it was in North Philadelphia, so I was like 5 miles away at a boarding school, but I had this experience where I would have my family at home, like on the weekends, and then I would go to school Sunday night, and then I would stay there through Friday. So I kind of feel like I had two families growing up, the students and the teachers and house parents that I spent a lot of time with, and then I had my family at home. So I feel really fortunate to have lived in like what I feel like are multiple spaces growing up. But there was always this sense of me being a part of some kind of artistic community. And I think that I remember taking my very first both dance class and I started playing the piano as a kid around like maybe like fourth or fifth grade or so. Because my parents were like, you got to do something. You got to be in something, because if not, you're going to drive us nuts. So I started doing both of those things around the same time and never thought that this was going to be like a career for me, both as a professional dancer, but certainly not a professional musician by any means. But I always kept coming back to the arts in one way or another. So it's always been a part of who I am, what I do, what I've done, and what I'm going to continue to do. So it meant a lot to me to have that as a part of my upbringing, and it's stuck with me ever since.
So before we get into what you currently do, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your career as a professional dancer. I don't believe you went to a conservatory for dance. So
I did not.
How did you land in dance and then ultimately transition into arts management?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, it was always something that I came back to. I studied dance in school. We had a very small program where if you had any artistic bone in your body, you were a part of the band, you were part of our like theater productions, and we would have people that would come in and teach in all of those disciplines. So I was always gravitating back towards that. So I studied it, but not necessarily like going to, like you said, a conservatory or going to any like doing, I would say, the traditional path. I did spend a little bit of time like out going to take classes in other places because it was always something that was fun for me, and it secretly got me off of campus, which was always wonderful. But so when I went to Syracuse, I originally thought that I was going to be a broadcast journalist, which is how I ended up with getting my degree in communication and rhetorical studies. But one of the wonderful parts about that program is they say, okay, well, this is your core, and this is what essentially what they're hoping to do is for you to find a way to be able to tell stories, connect with people, and find a way to have that be central in your life. And then everything else around that was always like whatever else you're interested in. So I was always very passionate about the arts. So I was going and taking dance classes because it was easy and it was fun and I enjoyed it. And I just loved it, but I never thought that I was going to do that professionally. So when I graduated from Syracuse, I went back to Philly for about 6 months or so, and then I moved to Atlanta. And anybody who's ever studied dance, music, acting, whatever it might be, knows that studying is incredibly expensive, right? So continuing your education is really critical, but it also it's an easy way to break the bank. Yep. So I started volunteering at the Atlanta Ballet, just to meet my community of people, and also to just find a way to take some free dance classes because it was something that I enjoy doing. And as I started going to class and just connecting with people, and I found out that like I would just start getting calls for like, hey, are you available for a gig tonight? Like, and this, I'm talking primarily like in the hip hop space. That was, I guess, more or less my bread and butter as a dancer, was more in the hip hop space than anything else. And I was like, sure, I'm available to do it. So I was taking all kinds of live shows, music videos, doing choreography gigs, and it just kind of like built from there. So just being connected with people and being available to take the jobs. So I was working during the day and then doing these other things at night, kind of burning the candle at both ends. But it gave me a tremendous respect, one, for people that are able to do just one or the other and make it all work. But you know how it is when you're like in your early parts of your career, like you're, early to mid 20s, and you're like, I'm just going to take every opportunity that comes to me. So I was doing that. So I would work my 8 hours in the day, then I would go teach, or I would go to rehearsal, then I would shoot a music video, or I would have some kind of show, background dancing for someone in a nightclub, and then turn around and do it all again the next day. It was incredibly exhausting. Just talking about it, I'm exhausted all over again.
Wow.
But I would never trade that experience for the world. It was really, really fun, and I loved it. So. Wow. From there, I was kind of managing both things at the same time. I got a part-time job in the box office at the ballet as well. And that gave me the flexibility to be able to take any and every opportunity that came up as a gig for me.
Wow. Wow. That sounds like I know my schedule and Matthew's schedule, and lives are busy, but that sounds like a lot to juggle. My goodness.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Before you worked part-time at the box office, did you have another role at the ballet, or was that
no
the role? Okay.
No, it was I started volunteering, and I was going like maybe 2 or 3 times a week because I moved to Atlanta. I didn't have a job. So it really gave me an opportunity, like I said, to just, one, get out of the house, but 2, start to plant some seeds and get connected. So no, that was I was volunteering for maybe about 4 or 5 months of doing that. And then I remember I started working, I would say maybe around like April, May, I got a job there. And that's when it all started to blossom from there. So yeah, it just kind of worked out that way.
And how did you pick Atlanta?
I had been once before. It's funny, I was telling someone else this story, but I thought that growing up in Philly, we're incredibly perfectly nestled between New York, Baltimore, and DC. So I was like, if I leave Philly, I'm probably going to end up in one of these 3 cities. And of course, I go like all the way south to Atlanta. But I had visited once or twice before. I had done a show there as well. And I was like, I kind of like the city. It felt good. We're talking about the mid 2000s or so. So at the time, it was like hip hop capital of the country. There was so much that was happening. And I just felt like this kind of gravitational pull there. And I made a couple of friends, and it just felt like a good place to give it a shot. And the other side of it is that there was so much activity, and it was just a booming city. Like the growth, it just exploded around that time. And it just felt like, one, it was much more affordable, I think, than moving to any one of those other cities. But 2, it's just like, if I'm going to give it a shot, I'll give it a shot now. If it works, it works. And if it doesn't, I can always go back. Because I still felt young enough that I was like, if I have to go home and, live with my parents again, I can do that without any shame. So I just took the leap of faith and went for it.
So from going to this obviously exciting hip hop dance life, while doing a little bit of administration, you then have now transitioned into full-time arts administration. We mentioned Hollywood Bowl, we mentioned Atlanta Ballet. So what about the arts admin field, this field of work, keeps you as excited and as engaged as maybe your time as a dancer?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Like I said, I started out truly on the administration side and working in the box office, and it gave me an opportunity to really see the inner workings. When you're a box office person, you kind of interact with all of the different facets of the organization, which I think is really, really interesting. You're talking with donors, you're talking with single ticket buyers, you're talking with subscribers, you're talking with production, because they have to understand, like, okay, well, we're bringing in, we have to kill a certain amount because we're doing a stage extension, or there's a projector and there's a screen and we got it. So all of those things, I felt like it was very much a crash course into all of the facets of how the organization works. And especially working in a ballet company, because you also like have a school too. So, and you have all of the kids around Nutcracker, so you're dealing with all the parents, and you're like, also at that time, our office was positioned in the lobby. So I was just seeing all the kids coming and going consistently. So it was really like this 360 view of what it takes to make an organization operate. And I was just like, this is really, really fascinating to me. But also I think, now fast forward, 20 years later, that there was a part of me that realized and recognized that I really love this side of it. Because I knew that I was never going to be able to dance forever. I knew that I was never going to be able to I shouldn't say I didn't want to be on the artistic side for the rest of my life. It's while it's fun, I think it takes a very different kind of individual to have that person feel like that's a home for them. And I just knew that wasn't for me. So I said, well, I could be a part of all of the behind the scenes stuff, or even the stuff that's in front of the scenes, but still, or in front of the camera, that still makes the organization tick and operate and allows us to really impact our community in different ways. And that meant something to me. So that felt really good. And as I've continued to build my career over the course of all of the different organizations that I've worked as a part of, it always makes me feel fulfilled. That when, I'm at the recital, or I'm at our community concert, or I'm at, one of our subscription concerts, it's like all of the work that I'm getting to do feels really good for me. And that's what helps get me out of bed every day.
I love that.
Wonderful.
It makes me so happy when I talk to other arts admin people who say and feel a lot of the same things I say and feel. It just makes me so happy.
Yeah.
So what specifically drew you to the orchestra? You've done a lot of work with orchestral organizations. Yeah. Not playing an orchestral instrument as a child. What drew you to the orchestra?
Yeah, absolutely. So around maybe about almost 10 years into my dancing career, I had a slight tear in my ACL. And I had a moment where I went to see a specialist for it, and he told me you could either let it heal naturally, but it's going to slow you down just naturally, but also just getting older. You're just naturally going to slow down, or we could have the surgery and it's going to take you out for a year. And I said, well, if I'm slowing down anyway, I might as well just let it go, and because I may never come back from this if I do have the surgery. So I continued to dance on it, and fortunately it didn't get worse, but I realized very quickly that my own abilities were starting to wane a little bit. Like in the dance world, you're constantly having to prove yourself. It's always like, what have you done for me lately, kind of thing. So I'm taking auditions and I'm taking like gigs, and I'm realizing that there are people out here that are like 10 years younger than me, that are so much better than I ever could have been. And it started to just, I think, wear and tear on me. And I realized that, like, okay, maybe it's time for me to start to think about a change. And that was a little bit of a hard decision to make, but I've since made my peace with it. And I was looking for like that next opportunity for me as an administrator. By this point, I started off part-time in the box office, then I became like group sales manager, and then I was like head of the box office, head of patron services. And I realized that there was like a ceiling that was there, where people kind of see you in very much an operational space. sales, customer service, like that kind of thing. And I knew that I had so much more to contribute, I think, to the world than just that. So I was looking for like my next big thing as I was sunsetting as a dancer and really thinking about, okay, well, what kind of opportunities could there be for me? And this position came up with the LA Phil. And I was like, oh, I like LA. I can see myself living there.
I love this city-based jumping. It's
God,
great.
that's
like
incredible.
It's been very much city-based until after that. And we'll circle back to it. But I at this point, I had been to LA a few times, and I was like, oh, I really like this city. I had never seen nor heard the LA Phil before, but I said that this could be something special, and it felt like this is a natural progression for me. And I think that, like I said, hindsight is always 20/20, but I think it's what I needed at that moment to step away from the dance world and really have like almost like a clean break.
Yeah.
So that way I could be in a different space, do some different things, and think about things like totally different. Whereas I wouldn't be missing being on stage or being a teacher or having an opportunity to dance at this point. So I was like, it's going to be like night and day for me. So I applied for the job, got the job, and then was like, what was it, like 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm like loading up a U-Haul and driving across the country. I got to the LA Phil, and it was just like I was just like, whoa, this is such a total different like animal and beast for me. Like I had been in the space, like the ballet had an orchestra as well. I played in the band in high school, middle school and high school. So was accustomed to it, but not on that level. It's like such a massive organization. Like it operates like a Fortune 500 company because there's so much activity, so much to do, so many people that it takes to really make it operate on such like that, just that high level of efficiency. But what was special about the LA Phil is one, they also have the Hollywood Bowl, which gives you a total different space. Like you have a venue that is 18,000 seats, and then you have this like state-of-the-art venue in the Walt Disney Concert Hall that's very much intimate. It's very new. It feels very good. And then you have an orchestra that is obviously one of the best in the world. And it just like opened my eyes to so much. But one thing that the LA Phil does really, really well, and like quite a few orchestras across the country, is that they operate more as a producer and a presenter and a curator, and as opposed to just being an orchestra that sits on stage and plays, the classics. Like they're really thinking about how can we be forward thinking? How can we be innovative? How can we be creative? How can we support our community in new ways? And that felt really, really good for me. I wouldn't have been able to articulate that when I went. It was just like, oh, I have a job that's going to take me to LA. It's going to give me an opportunity to do something a little different. But when I got there, it was just like, wow, this is really, really fantastic. And it felt so good to be a part of that organization. While I was there, we did so many amazing, amazing things that I just was like a sponge, just soaking up everything. We had our centennial celebration while I was there that felt really, really good. And I just said, this orchestra is really something special. And I'm just happy to be here. And how they invest in their people, I think was really critical for me. I just felt so welcomed and felt so a part of something special. And when it came time for me to think about doing something different, I said, I have to figure out whether I like working for orchestras or whether I like working for this orchestra. And that was the tipping point that got me out of LA, because I was like, I have to figure this out and figure this out now. And then, the rest is history from there.
Yeah. LA is, I've been blessed to be able to see the LA Phil in a couple performances, both at the Hollywood Bowl and in Walt Disney. And you're right, the curation that they do and they take pride in new music, and it's really cool to see. And a podcast guest from last season, Angelica Negron, last time she had a premiere at the last league conference, so it was so cool to see. It was such a great piece too. It was so cool. It had the flower like wilting away effect. It was really cool. Anyway,
yes.
But through this, now like discovering that you really like working in an orchestra, you've now really dove in and really participate in the League of American Orchestras, and all these different training programs. So there's Essentials of Orchestral Management, which I also did, which is such a great program. And then you also did the Emerging Leaders program, which is a really intense, I think it's like a year-long or a season-long program. Can you talk a little bit about those programs and like the impact they have had on you as a leader now in this industry?
Indeed. No, that I would 100% agree that I took the Essentials of Orchestra Management program first, and which is for those who don't know, it's a 10-day seminar where you kind of get a sneak peek into all of the facets of how an organization operates. So it's everything from fundraising to marketing to operations to negotiations to community development and managing musicians and managing yourself. And so it gave me this really, really wonderful opportunity to see how an orchestra operates on a lot of different levels. But by that point, I hadn't really connected with, I think I took it maybe like 2017 or so, just from a time period standpoint. And I had been in LA for maybe about 3 or 4 years, and just the speed and the pace at which LA goes, I hadn't really connected a lot with many of my orchestra colleagues. I had been in the dance space a lot. I had been with my ticketing people, my sales, my customer service people a lot, but I hadn't really connected a lot with the orchestra folks. So it gave me an opportunity to really think about, all right, and I think this was like the planting of the seed of like, do I like working for orchestras or do I like working for this one specifically? And meeting so many wonderful people that are in orchestras, large and small, across the country was really, really fantastic for me, because even though, the LA Phil is one of the biggest orchestras in the country, our problems and our challenges are not dramatically different from anyone else's. Right? Like, people tend to think like, oh, it's the LA Phil, they have all of this money, they can do whatever they want. And it's like, that's not always the case. We still, and all of us are trying to figure out, like, how do we retain subscribers? How do we stay relevant? How do we, continue to impact our community? How do we raise more money? All of those things. So being in Essentials was really, really wonderful for me to just meet so many people and hear the challenges and hear, like, how do we as orchestras help, like, change the landscape of the communities around us. And that felt really, really good for me. So I took a year off from doing that program, and then I did the Emerging Leaders program with the league after that. And that program, whereas Essentials is more very pragmatic and very, like, thoughtful in terms of, connecting the dots between, like I said, marketing, fundraising, and all of those things and how orchestras work. And Emerging Leaders is more introspective and really thinking about, like, how do I show up in the work that I need to do every day? And how does that help move the orchestra and the field forward in interesting ways? So it's much less like, okay, this is the role that having, like, a great community program could have, versus thinking about, like, are we really, am I as a leader asking the right questions, or am I as a leader really making sure that the community program that we're having is truly serving the community, and how do I show up in that? And that is, like, they're two totally different things, but they both, for me, were able, like, it would allow me to come full circle and allow me to feel like, man, this is truly, truly awesome. And like I said, that was between those two programs, they were only, like I said, I only did them about a year or so apart. But that was like the planting of the seeds of, like, I could be doing so much more than what I'm doing right here. Even though the work that I was doing in LA was really, really fantastic, I said, if I get plucked out of here tomorrow, this organization is going to be fine, right? But if I go to another organization, like, really, what kind of impact could I have in helping to, like, really move us forward and really think about the way that this orchestra gets to serve the community, but also from the unique chair that I sat in, is like, now I'm in the C-suite. So really getting to say, no, we're not going to invest our time, energy, and resources here. We're going to go in this direction. And that was really, that for me was just an eye-opening opportunity to just say, now I get to help influence the trajectory of this organization in a really, really positive way.
Yeah.
Amazing. So a little over a year ago, you arrived in your current position as executive director of the Louisiana Philharmonic. And as you said, you are now in a position where you can make these decisions and guide the direction of the orchestra. What did accepting this position mean to you?
It really meant a lot. It really meant a lot. Like to think that, at this point, less than 10 years ago, I took my very first orchestra job. And now here I am, leading an orchestra. It meant a lot to me. And I think what's really helpful here is that, and you asked me about this earlier, of like, what is the orchestral world meant to me, is I feel like they have embraced me and have said, you have something to say and you can help us move forward and we're going to help you move us along. So stepping into this role just kind of like felt like a stamp of validation, that we're all in this together and that everything that I've been pouring into this field is now being, poured back into me. So it feels very reciprocal and it feels so I'm overwhelmed with like joy still, even a year later. But also coming into, my very first executive director job in a city like New Orleans is really, really fantastic. This is a community that looks very much like me than not, which feels really good. So when I'm out in the community or I'm speaking with people and I'm trying to, tell them about the orchestra and the role that the orchestra plays in the community, they're like, I've never seen someone like you leading an orchestra before. And that they said, well, you must be doing good things. One, for the orchestra to place their trust in you. And I said, yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for this orchestra to do that. But there's a certain level of credibility that I think that comes when we say that the orchestra really wants to be a resource for the city of New Orleans, for the community that surrounds us, and for the state as well. So for me, it's given me such an opportunity to say that we can do the work and we can do it well and we can do it like community first, and really stand behind that. And I know that, I'm not the first person to say that, but I think to do it in a community that looks very much like me will really help to continue to plant seeds and deepen the roots and really connect us with our community even more.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, when you first arrived, was the patronage of the orchestra, did the patronage of the orchestra reflect the racial demographic of the city, or is that a project that you are endeavoring as executive director?
Yeah, I would say that our patronage doesn't look any different than any other orchestras, even though we're in a city that is, I would say, I think we're about 60 to 65% Black, which is really interesting to me. But I think that when we do, like anyone, when we do programs that are really focused on connecting with different facets of our community, the community does show up in a way that is meaningful and relevant to them.
Yeah.
So part of my goal and my mission here is to really think about like, okay, we've been trying to serve this community for a while, and it's almost like tent poles. Like we'll do a program, it'll attract a lot of people in, and then they won't come back until the next program that we do. So I start to think about like, okay, well, how do we start to draw a through line between it and move this, like, it doesn't have these up and down moments, that we get to see that there's a true commitment to serving a diverse segment of the city in a way that's meaningful and relevant to them. So it's not always necessarily doing like a community concert or going and playing in a church or whatever it might be. It's just like, okay, we want to make sure that the music that is relevant to the people here, we're gonna highlight, and we're gonna support these artists, and we're gonna connect with them. I would say that the artistic team here has been very thoughtful. The artistic team and the musicians are very, very thoughtful around what our role and our value is to the community. So we've really been investing back into New Orleans and Louisiana-based artists. And by nature, they're just naturally going to be more diverse by doing so. Like we know that we're never going to be, we're like, when it comes to playing like the war horses or the classics or the masterworks, as some people call them, we're never going to be Berlin, we're never going to be New York, we're never going to be Chicago, we're never going to be LA, and that's fine. But what we can be is the orchestra that is here in New Orleans, that plays the music by the people that have been born, bred, raised their families here, that have created their music here. And there's a strong orchestral tradition here in the city. So I think that there's like a unique opportunity for us to really lean in on that and connect us back to the music that is here. We have a show coming up in April of next year with Big Frida, who's a bounce artist. And it's going to be the very first opportunity to hear bounce music played with an orchestra before. I'm a little worried about how this is going to sound, but we're doing all the right things to make sure that it sounds right. But doing it in a way that really pays homage and respect to the traditions of the music, I think will really allow us to do well, both artistically and commercially.
I think that's so one thing about orchestras that we've thought a lot about, like on the podcast and here at the Canton Symphony, and that I think a lot about as someone working in community engagement, is that especially American orchestras, because orchestra comes from this European tradition, American orchestras are really, I think, starting to realize that our identities have to be a lot more individualistic, like the American identity kind of is. Every community is different. Every orchestra is going to have to be different because we're all in these different communities. And I think that that's so beautiful with Louisiana pouring into Louisiana music, and that beautiful, because that makes sense. That's logical. If we're serving our audiences and those people, we want to find ways to connect with what's there instead of maybe trying to force feed something that isn't as appealing to that audience. But Louisiana is also pretty unique in a lot of ways. So going a little bit more nitty gritty structurally with the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra, I remember in Essentials of Orchestra Management, what we did case studies, learn about different organizations and how they function in different things. And Louisiana is one of them because of the way that it's run, because it's very different. So I'll read. So it is the oldest full-time musician-governed and collaboratively operated orchestra, which means something, right? So can you maybe explain how Louisiana is different from other American orchestras in the way that it actually operates?
Indeed. Yeah, it's a really fascinating model that I think was also part of the thing that attracted me to this organization. By being musician governed, it's actually musician owned as well. So when you think about like, say, for instance, like Apple or Google, and they have shareholders, right, that actually own the company. Our musicians are the quote unquote shareholders of our organization. So they are the ones who ultimately get to say that this is the direction that the organization is going to go in. So whenever we have what we call a corporate meeting, it is amongst all of the musicians of the orchestra. And that feels really, really fantastic because there's a level of investment that is not, I just sit on stage and play this. It's that they are very much rooted in everything that we do as an organization. And that to me means so much, because there isn't okay, well, the board wants to go in one direction, the staff want to go in another direction, and the musicians want to go in another direction. And then, there's all this constant tension that's happening. It's like, no, there has to be alignment for us to make any kind of steps forward, which I think is really, really helpful for us as an organization. So you have the musicians as the corporate members. When it comes to the board of trustees, there's representation from the musicians and your community trustees. So much like you would see in your traditional nonprofit organization, where you have your trustees that are your fiduciaries, but also the musicians are fiduciaries as well. And then the staff, we get to help serve and support and feel like a part of all of those things and really be in service of the organization as a whole. So everything from who's going to be leading the orchestra, to what we decide to play, to what we're going to do from an education and community space, to how we raise funds and how we take on new, creative, exciting ideas, it's all run by committees. And what it does is it makes sure that there's always multiple voices in the room whenever we decide to make a big decision. Now, of course, you can't do everything by committee. Like we're not figuring out whether we're going to use this type of paper versus that type of paper in the office copier. But when we say, okay, well, how many concerts do we want to have this year? How long do we want the season to be? Who do we want to lead the orchestra as a guest conductor? I mean, most, music director searches are a totally different thing. But when we think about all of those wonderful things, like we have a fantastic partnership with the opera, and we say, okay, well, what's exciting to us, and how do we want to push ourselves artistically? It's all done in, for lack of a better term, around a round table. And we say, okay, well, what are the big ideas? What are we thinking about? Where do we want to be in 5 years? And how do we help build towards that? And what it does is it gives us buy-in right on the ground floor. So it isn't okay, now I need to go and talk to the musicians about it, and now I need to go sell it to the board. It's like everybody's in the room all the time, which I think is really, really helpful, because there's so much more trust, I think, amongst us. And that really helps us, I think, operate on a much more thoughtful and committed level, to not only serving our musicians and our community, but really connecting all of those things together and really building it out like an ecosystem. So it feels really good. It does take time as well. Like anything, working through a committee structure is always can be slow at times, but like I said, it prevents challenges on the back end because everybody's there on the ground floor. So it's really, really helpful.
That buy-in, and everyone, that's seems like to me the most exciting part of what you just said is this idea that people have a buy-in and a voice and ownership of what's going on. And I feel like in any orchestra struggling to take the ideas that I'm conceiving as a staff person who's creating educational content and making sure it's like, okay, how do I write an email to my musicians so that they understand why I chose to do this thing? And I try to do that. Who knows if it's actually effective, but it would be cool. But you're right. I don't envy maybe the time and the scheduling and the logistics that are required to get everyone in the room.
Yeah, I mean, and it does present challenges, but I think I try to make sure that we're allotting time to work through it. So it just means we just have to be so much more intentional with the things that we need to do. So if there's a big initiative, we try to make sure that we back it up far enough that we leave enough space for debate, and also building enough trust that sometimes when the quick decisions need to be made, that they know that it's always coming from the right place. And from my specific role, as the executive director, that I can, and maybe not always bring together the full committee, but I might place a few strategic phone calls saying, hey, this thing just came up. I need to bend your ear on something. What do you think? Before we go ahead and make that, like I said, a big or a rash decision. It's like, I might call the orchestra president, I'll call the board president, I'll call, the head of the programming committee or the head of the education committee and just say, hey, this is coming up. What are your thoughts on it? Should we take this to the full committee? Do we need to call an emergency meeting, or can this wait a little bit later, or can we just move on? And they're like, more often than not, because I think we've built a good trust amongst each other. They say, I trust your instincts, just go for it. And then we'll talk about it when the time is right. And then we deal with it as it comes up.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is fascinating to me because I went to graduate school in New York City at Mannes College of Music. And something I found that it was disappointing to me was that so many of my instrumental colleagues really were not that interested in orchestra. And for a lot of them, orchestra was not in their future. It was not in their future plans. And when I talked to them about it, they said, I just don't feel as a player in an orchestra, and especially string players said this, as just a player in a string section of an orchestra, I can really explore who I am as an artist in the way I want and have agency over the art I create. And I think that the structure of the Louisiana Philharmonic really seems to address that in a really unique way in the orchestra world. So I'm curious, as a conductor, I did poke around your website a little bit, and I believe it is your music director's final season, if I saw that correctly. So
It is.
you are about to go into a music director search, or you're probably already in the midst of a music director search.
Happening. It's happening.
We're in it. We're up to here.
Right. So how are the musicians involved in the music director search in a way that they wouldn't be at any other orchestra?
Yeah. Well, what's fascinating is that I think by nature, like even though our structure is dramatically different, there's still a committee that comes together to work through it. So, I've been fortunate enough, when I got to Omaha, we were in a music director search as well. And now here we are, here I am again, going through this. So most organizations will have a small committee that'll include musicians, community members, either board members or outside members, and then a staff member or two. So we have a very similar committee here that helps vet and figure out, like, okay, well, what qualities are we looking for? What are we really thinking about what do we want in our next leader as a music director? And by having that, like I said, that 360 view at all times, we really know, and we work very closely together. So we know, like, from a programming standpoint, or from an artistic and our education and community engagement standpoint, we know what it is that we want. And there are representatives from so many of these other committees as a part of this larger committee that get to say, all right, from the perspective of, like I said, education and community, or for programming, like, these are the qualities that we need. And we built out a profile, or I should say they built out a profile, because, like I said, they've been doing this for quite a few years now. And we said, at, like, coming back last year from the pandemic, like, do these things still matter to us? And are they weighted the same way that they were maybe pre-pandemic? And there was a little bit of adjustment to it, but I think that once we decide, like, okay, these are the folks that we want to see, and these are the reasons why we want to see them, then it becomes a totally different game, because it's not like we're just saying, okay, well, these are all the conductors that we want to work with on an annual basis. It's like, no, we're actually thinking about, like, could this person be our next music director? And that changes everything from the way that, like, it's no longer just how are they going to lead from the podium, but it's like, okay, well, how are they going to connect with the audience? How are they going to lead how are they going to lead rehearsals? Are they communicating well with our head of programming and saying, these are the reasons why I'm selecting these programs? Are they willing and open to go and talk to, some of the students around town, or talk to, some of our other partners, and what is their willingness like? So your eyes are open in a new way. You're like, your antennae are up, saying, I'm paying attention to everything. But also, like, knowing our model specifically, you start to think about, like, is this person collaborative? Are they thoughtful? How do they communicate with others? Do they treat people with respect? And all of these things it's no different than what I think any other music director will be asked to do. But I think by nature, there is not this music director on a hill. Like, they're not going to be able to come into the LPO and say, this is what I want to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and then be done with it. Like, they have to be so much more open and responsive and respectful, I think, than what it would be in any other environment. But also understanding that, they have to be willing to be challenged. And be challenged by the people that you're supposed to lead is a very, very different thing than being challenged by me as their peer, or challenged by the board as ultimately who they report to. You have to be able to lead and follow in an interesting way. And we know that that's a quality that good conductors and great music directors have, but it has to be so much more explicit in our environment than what it would be in your traditional model. So I would say that the musicians here are acutely aware of that, and really will overemphasize that they ultimately have the vote and the vote and the ownership over the success or the failure of this person. So that makes it so much more that's at play here with them specifically.
Definitely. Yeah. And when the final vote is made, do they all get a vote?
Yeah, every musician that is either tenured or is on contract with us gets a vote. Cool. So they have to vote, and we want to make sure that it feels good, because there isn't this, like, There isn't this like, well, it's not my show, right? They can't opt out of this. It's like, no, you have to do it. You have to be a part of this because it's baked into who we are as an organization. So yeah.
And again, completely unique in the
I'm trying to think if there are
the Berlin Philharmonic they vote on their music director, the musicians, but really generally that's not how it works.
Yeah,
so
it's unique. There's a lot of unique things about Louisiana, and it's fun to talk with you about them because I've only read about them. But going back to a little bit what you said earlier, when you were appointed to the LPO as executive director, at that time in America, you were the only Black executive director of a major American orchestra. There were no other Black executive directors. Now Robert Reed is at the Madison Symphony Orchestra. That happened back in March, really recently. Yes. Which is really exciting. But you're so involved in DEI work now. We mentioned some committees. You're for the League of American Orchestras, Tessitura Network. You've co-founded the Black Arts Leadership Alliance, which I'll let you talk about what that is. But why do you think that this work, DEI work, and this work of inclusion and making our staff, our executive directors, our music directors, what have you, look like the communities we serve is so important?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating time to be a part of this work and to lend my own time and energy to it because it's so important. I think that there is we as people that have been in this industry and who have been in this industry or who have grown up in it, who know it through and through, know that there's always been like the orchestra is dying, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, right?
Yeah.
And we know that it hasn't fallen yet, so it's gonna be fine. But I see it as I see this work as a part of just continuing to make ourselves be relevant to the community around us and be welcoming. By nature, what we do is like there's no one saying that what an orchestra does is for a certain group of people. And we see it where there's a space that we open up our doors and we say that we can't say that this is like some of the greatest music that's ever been written and say, no, only these people can hear it or only these people are supposed to be a part of it. Like those two things don't make sense. So we only benefit by just, kicking down walls and, opening as like just saying, this is a space for you. But also it works both ways. Like by knocking down those walls, that also means like we can now go out even more than what we were doing before and show up and really be, like I said earlier, like a resource for our community in ways that are truly meaningful for them. I tell this story all the time. Like I said, I went to a small school in North Philadelphia that was only about maybe 4 or 5 miles away from where the Philadelphia Orchestra plays. But they would come to our school and do a concert every year. Now, we were fortunate enough to have the resources to like get on a bus and go, down to the hall and hear them. But they felt that it was important enough for them to come and play for us. And to me, that just shows that, and like I said, the school is a lot of them look like me as well, but it allowed them to think about like, all right, it's not just let's go and hear the orchestra play. They're going to play some Brahms or they're going to play Peter and the Wolf, and it's going to be fine. But just feeling like the orchestra is investing back in us. So now I want to make sure that people are thinking about, okay, if we're going to go out and we're going to play in the community, let's actually go to the places where the community needs and wants us to be. And not just saying we're going to go, I got to stop doing this. I always pick on Brahms, but we're not just going to go and play Brahms and, in a neighborhood where they might not know who he is, know what kind of music he's composed, or think like this music may not be for them. So what do you want to hear? What do you want us to do? What do you want? How do you want us to show up? Like maybe you don't want the full orchestra to come. Maybe you just need one musician to come out and play and do a little instrument demo and talk about how they got into their path. Maybe it's a little quartet that needs to go and play somewhere, or like it's all of those things. It's really, really critical to be able to say, let's do something a little bit different. Let's think about things differently. And to do that, I think you need people that look different, that think different, that came from different backgrounds, that are influenced in different ways, that listen to different types of music, that grew up in orchestra, grew up playing in the orchestra, that didn't grow up playing in the orchestra. Like, you need all of those different types of people to be a part of it. So that way, when you're having those conversations, you're actually having the diversity of thought. Ultimately is what it is. We're looking for diversity of thought, most likely in these situations. So when we say now that, like, you mentioned like Robert Reed, there's also Blake Anthony Johnson at the Chicago Sinfonietta.
Blake.
And,
Blake's going to be on the podcast this season. I'm excited.
Yeah, and Terrell at Chicago Phil, and there's just like, there are so many, like, all of us grew up differently, and we all have different opinions, even though we're all Black. There's like so many, we're all going to bring something different to the table, which I think is really, really, really fun. So what that means for me is really making sure that I want to have as many smart people in the room as possible. So then that way, one, not only are they going to be able to make a connection and say they're going to bring their lived experience and bring their own unique perspective to the table, but I have to have the mindset of like, I got to make sure that the table is big enough for all of these people to bring it in. And I think that it ultimately will serve us, selfishly, to say, I have the biggest table possible. Yeah. And when it comes time for me to say, do you know this person? Can you make an introduction for me? We need to raise some new funds. Like, what are we thinking about here? Our community programs are going a little stagnant. How do we think about things a little bit differently? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so welcoming all of those different opinions is really, really critical to doing that. And I've heard this phrase before, is like, you always want to make sure that you're trying to reach as far to the most marginalized people as you can, because everybody else that's in between where you are and where those folks are will be brought right along with it. So that is really, really, really helpful. And I just try to make sure that I'm doing the work that I can do from my chair with my lived experience, and then hopefully be able to, like I said, build the biggest table that I can, so that way we can do more and more and more.
I love that. I love that.
Tell us a little bit about the Black Arts Leadership Alliance and the work that this organization does.
For sure. So when I got to this was born out of Omaha. My time in Omaha, there was we had when I started, there were maybe between the Symphony and Omaha Performing Arts, which is they're a presenter, but they also manage the venues that we performed in. There were maybe two or three Black people that worked in these organizations, and I was one of them. So as myself and the person who was the head of HR for Omaha Performing Arts, we said we have to create a space that's welcoming and open and really feeling like we're not alone on this island here in arts administration, but also, Omaha's perfectly positioned in the middle of the country. So really thinking about a space that for administrators, specifically Black administrators, because like I said, when we start to think about like most marginalized in our spaces, like I think at the time when she and I were having this conversation, we were trying to figure out like, okay, well, do we make it as broad and welcome in as like any people of color? And she said, no, I want to be very, very specific with who we're targeting here and making sure that the people that look like you and I know that we're not just a part of like we can, yes, be a part of a larger group, but that we're going specifically after this group that can now know that there are more people like us. When you go with just people of color, that can mean a lot of things. And then all of a sudden you become a little bit more homogenized in that. And so I was like, great, I'm on board with it. So we said, okay, well, so because she was head of HR and was very thoughtful about trying to build out the team at Omaha Performing Arts, I think they had hired 2 or 3 Black people that have come in on the administrative side. And we had hired one on the staff at the Omaha Symphony. And we said, we're going to bring this small group of people together, and we're going to make sure that we're just going to be a resource for each other, to have a place to just say, are you okay? Know that the work that you're doing, you feel, you are valued, we see you, we appreciate you, and just love on one another. And then we said, okay, well, she and I were in senior leadership roles. So we said we want to do some mentoring. We want to think about like, okay, if someone's trying to advance their career, how do they help build to get there? So we were doing like resume workshops and really thinking about like, all right, how do I get into a career in the arts? And then we said, okay, well, that meant now we got to go out and we got to start talking to schools. We got to do job fairs. We got to do all these things. And I think part of it was self-serving for her, as head of HR, to like, I got to make sure I'm like bringing in the most diverse people that I can. But knowing that people would say, I've never seen somebody that looks like you doing this work before. And what she and I have, ultimately been able to do with kind of founding this group and really thinking about, how do we help serve other Black arts leaders of saying we just need to make ourselves as visible as possible. So that meant going out and speaking at conferences, doing things just like this. She's now working for the Broadway League and leading their Broadway Change podcast, specifically around people of color. And it has just grown into now, like she's in New York, I'm here. One of our other original members is now in Massachusetts. So we're just like starting to grow and grow and grow. And we operate in a space where it's like there's a little bit of business, but there's always still that just making sure that people feel connected to each other and giving each other space and opportunity to talk about the challenges and the things that we're seeing and how we're pushing each other to say, no, you're not thinking big enough. Like one of the things that we talked about in one of our meetings, I would say maybe about a year or so ago, were about land acknowledgements. I don't know if either of you have been around at a conference or something like that where they acknowledge the land that they're occupying, primarily being either ceded or unceded land from, traditionally Native American tribes. Yeah. And we talked about like, what does that mean for us as Black people and how do we feel about that? So giving us space and opportunity to talk about it in a safe space where we don't have to be the person who's leading that conversation or being in a room with potentially other people of color or just as a wide open space, and saying, it gave us an opportunity to like talk through our emotions in a quote unquote, like not only brave space, but a safe space amongst each other. So that's the role that it has been playing over the last couple of years now. And it feels really, really helpful for us to be able to do so.
Yeah, that I know how helpful it is for me to be able to talk to female leaders in this industry and, just call them, text them, and just ask a question and just having someone like you to talk to and know that you can share conversation within a safe space is so essential. What do you think is something that white people in arts administration could do to create safer spaces in our work environments?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because, just by nature of I would say the country that we're in the country that we're in and the work that we do, right? We're going to be in the minority more often than not. So I would say, one, allowing people of color and Black administrators specifically to just be who they are first and foremost, right? Not asking them to either lead their EDI initiatives or their task group or, whatever it might be, just saying, do you want to be a part of this or no? And that's totally fine. But not asking them to take on any additional work without either compensating them for it or giving them the opportunity to say yes or no for it. Give them the space to just, like I said, operate and be like a whole human being. The second part is not expecting to speak for everyone. As I mentioned earlier about like Robert, Blake Anthony, myself, like we all have different lived experiences. Right. So what I might feel about a certain thing would be completely different than how one of them might feel. Give them the opportunity to lead in a way that's meaningful for them or not. And don't give them don't push too hard if it's, because sometimes it can be too much for certain people. The other thing that I think is really, really interesting is allowing them and us, I should say, to be our authentic selves, wholeheartedly. I I spoke about this before. I went back and I spoke at Essentials of Orchestra Management this summer. And, we know, like we talked about earlier, I just completed my first year here. And occasionally I will wear like white sneakers with my suit. One, because I just try to be a really fashionable person. But two, I will always want to make sure that if there are people that are coming to concerts or I'm in the community or something like that, that people know that it's okay to wear sneakers to come to one of our concerts. Like, I don't want them to feel like because they see the orchestra and, tie and tails, with their patent leather shoes on, that it's like, oh, this might not be the space for me. But knowing that in my own personal life, that I like to wear my sneakers just in and of itself, right? So if I'm just out on the weekends, or I might wear, my Syracuse hat or my Eagles hat with my sneakers, and I'm perfectly comfortable in that. And that does not take away anything from me from being a leader. Like, I don't have to be in a suit all the time. And if I'm in a suit, then it's okay for me to wear my sneakers with my suit. So knowing that where like the role that I uniquely play as a Black executive director, that it's my job sometimes to break down those barriers, and knowing that like that we have to sometimes as non-people of color or people of like, I would never want to go and tell a woman what she can or cannot wear. Right. But I think people feel a certain level of comfortability telling me what I can and cannot wear because of my role. And we know that that has absolutely nothing to do with how I show up to work every day. And that's something that I actually learned, earlier. And I said this to her this summer. She's a woman that's leading an orchestra. And I said, I didn't have other like Black executive directors to look up to. So I would look up to the women because they were the minorities in the room. No matter what color they might be, like, they're the minority. So like thinking about like, how do you show up every day is really like, I had to thank her for it, because I said, you've given me an opportunity to be my authentic self because you're your authentic self. And that was creating a safe and brave space for me to be able to do so. So now I'm able to give that back and do it in a way that's really, really helpful. So I would say that as, like I said, non-people of color, what you can do is help emulate and model and check people when they say certain things that might start to break down that ability to create those brave and safe spaces for people to just be who they are and help us model moving forward. So that would be my number one thing to be able to walk away with.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I was shouting out Jennifer Barlament for being that person for me. I always look up to her.
That's exactly what I was talking about.
Are you talking about Jennifer? Oh my God.
I'm talking about Jennifer
Oh
Barlament.
my God. I think seeing her just be so her, leading an orchestra as a woman, just has been such an inspiration for me so much. So it's so cool to hear. And also, sneakers with suits is cool. It looks cool. I think it's cool.
It is, right?
It's really cool. Oh
I'm waiting for the time where I'm like, I'm angling for my GQ cover. Like, that's what I'm going for. So
you're on your way. It's gonna happen.
I'm trying to make it happen. So if you know somebody, let them know I'm available.
So as we come to the end of today's episode, we are going to ask you the question that we ask every guest on this podcast at the end of their interview. How do we orchestrate change?
Oh, that's a great question. I say this a lot in the work that I do, but I think that change comes from being intentional about the work that you're doing, knowing where you want to go, having a good reason why you're going in that direction, and just moving forward with your whole authentic self to do so. And by nature, things will start to change. Knowing that if you're not changing, then you're ultimately dead. So knowing that we have to be able to say, how do I do things differently? How do I do things better? How do I innovate? How do I get creative? How do I think about things differently? But all of that comes back to like, why am I doing this? And why is this important to me? By connecting all of those dots and really saying, I'm going to do each one of these things with my whole, I would say with your whole chest, that I'm trying to move things forward. I'm trying to move the ball down the field. And that's ultimately going to create change. But you have to know what it is that you're trying to do, and really asking yourself that why question is really, really critical. You know, is it to score? Is it to say, I wanted to be first? Is it to say, you know, I wanted to make a deeper impact? Is it to say that, you know, I need to raise more money? Like, all of these things are valid. But like I said, the why is really critical, because that's what's gonna help you move forward. So doing it with a certain level of intention, or doing it with a sense of, I'm trying to get from A to B, I think is gonna lead you like in the best possible way forward. So I always, like I said, lead with intention, lead with your whole, you know, say it with your whole chest, and just do it. And it's going to happen. And then trust in yourself is going to be, that would be my third thing. Trust in yourself that you're making the right decisions for the right reasons. And that's how we ultimately do it.
Anwar Nasir, the executive director of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra.
Orchestrating Change is a production of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
Our theme music was composed by Eric Gould and performed by Derek Snyder and Tim Adams.
Our audio engineer and mixer is Nathan Maslick, with video and audio editing by Shoreline Media.
Thank you for listening, and see you next time.